Fantastic. Okay. I think we'll wait.
Hey, Max.
Hey, I think we'll give it about one more minute before we really get started, so that we have sort of on MIT time in terms of people taking a moment to join. But thank you for joining us. Lucas, I assume that you're from SpiceDAO, right?
I'm a member of the DAO, yes.
Okay, fantastic. And Mary, are you as well, or are you one of us grad students?
I'm the only representative of the DAO participating today, but really appreciate your invite, Max, and thank you for pushing the time. Sorry we couldn't do it yesterday.
Yeah, no worries. We're excited about this. Well, why don't I give you a little bit of background on the group before we get started, and then I think we'll open it up, and I suspect we'll get probably 2 or 3 more people joining in the next few minutes as well. So I'm a PhD student at Northeastern. Daniel is as well. I think Ryan also is. So a number of us are grad students at Northeastern, but the group also contains people who are not. For example, Tyler is a professional software engineer. Sean has a physics and math background and teaches refugee children. So there's all sorts of backgrounds in the group. But basically during COVID, we didn't have a good place to discuss academic papers. And so, because we could no longer go to the cafe. And so we kind of created this little seminar group for that purpose. But we've had some events about Web3 in the past. We had Tyler Hobbs on twice. He's a very well-known NFT artist. And I think, as people who kind of work on the tech side, we're interested in knowing more about the other side of this, right? Like kind of how our creative and professional users thinking about Web3 and its application. So I'm hoping we can explore some of that today with you.
Oh yeah, well, we're here for the culture. So that sounds perfect.
Fantastic. Sweet. Well, why don't we get started with a little bit of background? So I feel like I'm kind of a Dune nerd and I'm like enmeshed in exactly who you guys are, but some people might not be quite as up to date. Could you just give like the quick summary on what did you buy? Why was it worth $3 million? And what's like the short version of what's going on here, so we can kind of set the stage?
Oh, that's a great question. Great place to start. I don't know how succinct I can be because we have not spoken a lot publicly. So we don't quite have the script down, but I think in general, at the end of November of last year, a rare copy of the Dune Bible was put up for auction at Christie's Paris. What is the Dune Bible? Between 10 and 20 copies were printed in the late 1970s by Alejandro Jodorowsky, who's a very famous writer and director. And he very famously wanted to adapt Frank Herbert's Dune, the first novel in the series, as a movie. And so Jodorowsky has a couple of cult classics that he directed. And so he got together some up and coming artists at the time who eventually became global superstars. So one was Mobius, a French cartoonist. The other was H.R. Geiger, who became a famous artist and famously designed the alien creature from the Alien movies. And he got Dan O'Bannon and like a bunch of other, like Chris Voss, a bunch of other like young, talented conceptual artists together. And they wanted to make their version of Dune. And so the Dune Bible, this book, is essentially a collection of storyboards, which maps out the entire movie. It also includes character designs, machine designs, set designs, etc., costumes, everything you can think of to basically help financiers who they were pursuing to fund the movie to give them the most complete vision they could in pictures, right? So that's the Dune Bible. It is a book, but it's actually more of an artwork because each copy of the book was hand bound. Each copy was printed, in a limited edition so that each copy is actually unique. Like some colors might have printed out, bolder on some copies than others. So each copy is unique. So we view it as an artwork. And therefore, the DAO, Decentralized Autonomous Organization, was formed around fundraising a pool of capital to bid and hopefully win, and we did ultimately win, the book at auction. The original estimate, if my memory serves, was 35 to 45,000 euros. I contributed as just like an outside member, not knowing anything, about 48 hours before the auction. And there was chat in the Discord, which is our main communication hub to this day for members and non-members alike to communicate with each other. There was chat in the Discord the night before the auction and the day of the auction that we didn't really see the price exceeding like 100,000 euros. What happened as I watched the auction live stream, I live in the Pacific Northwest. And so it was like 7 a.m., 6 a.m., 7 a.m. my time. The live auction from Paris was being streamed. We saw that the auctioneer was quickly bidding up the price. And so before we knew it, the price had exceeded 500,000 euros, and then it hit like 800,000 euros. Now, what's interesting here is because we are a Web3 platform, totally public, totally transparent, any other bidder in the auction would actually see how much money we had to spend, right? And on the morning of the auction, we had publicly fundraised $900,000 US, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know what the exact exchange rate was into euros, but that would equal, let's say, like 750,000 euros. So by the time it got to like 800, technically we'd run out of steam, right? But we had a community member who actually registered with Christie's. They KYC'd, which means that they, revealed their identity. They put a credit card number down, and they were bidding on our group's behalf. And this community member was one of the co-founders of the project. Originally, this whole kind of enterprise was organized by 3 individuals. So there were 3 co-founders. So he is one of these fortunate people who bought years ago 20 cents or 25 cents, had reached like over $4,000. So he had this personal fortune that he could access and draw upon. And he decided to leverage that and keep bidding. So what he did during the live auction was he began to bid above our public pool of funds that we had all, over 800 people had contributed to. And what happened is after it got past 1 million euros and 1.5 million euros, he kept bidding. At that point, there were only 2 bidders left in the auction. And finally, it got up past 2 million euros and then 2.5 million euros. And our community member did it. He made the winning bid of 2.66 million euros, and we won the auction.
So that's super cool. As like a computer science guy, I think the thing that's the most interesting to me, and I would imagine to many of us, is the DAO aspect of this. And so I think like mechanistically, it's not that hard to understand kind of the algorithms of how you can have a smart contract and how this can allow you to raise money. But what is kind of hard to understand is socially, how do you organize decision making as a group, right? Because you have to reach consensus somehow about what to do with this document, where to store it, how to, obtain it from Christie's. It's all these like mechanical, physical things that have to happen.
Are you going to?
Yeah, and then you have to decide, what sort of. I imagine you're going to make all sorts of of media that's sort of inspired by this, right? And that's kind of the next step. And so there's probably some like collective decision making that happens there where people have to agree to some extent. So could you speak to that? Like, how does that process work? How do you come to decisions? How do you like pitch something to be decided upon, et cetera?
Absolutely. So yes, totally agree that a DAO is a very unique way of organizing consensus and making decisions collectively and democratically. So there are DAOs have been operating on the Ethereum blockchain and specifically for I think over 3 years now. Things really came to a head last year because there was the greatest amount of participation globally from users on the Ethereum chain last year. So that's where DAOs came into play because a lot of people wanted to do anything and everything. And the DAO is a way to kind of organize around a specific mission. And so SpiceDAO, when the three co-founders initiated the raise, which as I mentioned, attracted over 800 people, they had explicitly stated this three-part mandate, right? So it's what are we trying to do? What are we raising money for? The first goal was to acquire the book, right? And the thing about the book was that it had always been held in private collections. It had never been seen publicly. So our first mandate was to acquire the book and then make it public. And I can speak to the steps that we have gone through lately to make that happen. The second mandate was to produce an original animated limited series and sell it to a streaming service. So this is a very bold goal, right? I mean, creating an animated series takes multiple years. It takes dozens and dozens of partners and stakeholders. And then that's just to create it. Now to actually successfully sell it to Netflix, Amazon, Hulu is a whole nother venture, right? And the third mandate was to support projects from the community. We had raised this treasury, and so we wanted the community to pitch us their creative projects that we could finance. So how does the DAO operate? Well, I think an easy way to make a distinction between a traditional corporation or traditional small business, right, and a DAO is that in the traditional for-profit business structure, it's a top-down approach. So at the very top, you would have a board of directors, and then you would have the C-suite, right? The chief operating officer, chief executive officer, chief financial officer, and then you have your your vice presidents and presidents, and then you have management. With the DAO, it's all bottom up. So there are different models of how a DAO can operate. SpiceDAO, after it was founded by the three co-founders, after the raise was closed, after we won the auction, the next step was to decide how are we going to organize ourselves. It took a little time. This was the end of November. Then we hit December with all of the holidays and people, traveling and stuff. So there was less activity in December. But in January, one of the co-founders made the decision based on feedback from the community to create a core team to lead the strategic vision and daily operations of the DAO. So I know that on the core team is 4 people right now. It's 2 co-founders and then 2 community members. So the 2 community members literally at the end of November and in December were just in the Discord. They were very active, interacting with the other members. They were pitching ideas. They were just showing a lot of interest and a lot of dedication. And one of the co-founders, really identified these 2 individuals, and they reached out to them, and they basically did interview process, for lack of a better term, and basically found a good fit, a good communication, good working style with those two other individuals. And so the core team was formed. Now, how did the core team officially get put into place? Well, in a DAO, all decisions are made through voting, through proposals, and then through voting. And so essentially, there are two different platforms where proposals can be published. One is Discourse, right? So we've been talking about Discord, which is like a peer-to-peer, like social media type of platform. Discourse is where you publish a proposal, but then you can receive comments, you can receive feedback. It also tracks the number of views, the number of likes, interactions, and engagement. All of this information helps you decide whether it's a popular proposal, whether people are engaging with it and reading it and care about it. But you could also publish a proposal, it could go nowhere. The second platform, which is where the voting happens, is called Snapshot. So in the kind of best practices of a DAO, you would put a proposal up on for 72 or 48 hours, sorry, and just get the community's feedback. Then you would refine your proposal, by answering people's questions and stuff, and take it to Snapshot. This is where the governance token comes into play. So when people contributed to the original fundraise to buy the book at the Christie's auction, they contributed Ether, right? Which is the coin of Ethereum, the native coin of Ethereum. What they received in return was Spice tokens. So they contributed Ether and they got back Spice tokens. So the Spice token is not a financial instrument. It is a governance token. And basically, when you go to vote on a proposal in Snapshot, your vote has the proportional impact of how many tokens you own. So in SpiceDAO's case, we have some individuals who own a lot of tokens, which means that when they vote, their voice is louder than other people who have less tokens. And so to kind of bring this full circle, the way that the core team was elected was that a proposal was put into Snapshot, and we had over 80 members vote using their tokens, and the core team was elected. They were voted into power. Part of that core team proposal was saying it was a 3-month contract. They had specific goals that they were going to work towards and achieve. And yeah, some of those goals were things you mentioned beforehand, like you have this book, now what do you do with it? Where do you store it? How do you pay Christie's? All these logistical things in the real world. The very interesting thing about SpiceDAO is that it has 1 foot in the real world and 1 foot in Web3. And that makes us very, very unique because the majority of Web3 projects are crypto native on the many different blockchains. And there is a very tenuous connection to the real world. But SpiceDAO has really been, it's something I'm proud of, being a member, has been very forward-thinking and very proactive and really setting a precedent for every other organization that comes after us about how to transition into the real world, right? While still being crypto native.
How many members are there, like roughly?
Currently, we have over 800 token holders. So that's 800 members.
That's a large democracy. I mean, it seems to me like you would be herding cats if it weren't for kind of the mechanism of the voting platform that can systematize everything, right? So that it almost seems like it would be impossible to do without some sort of tech infrastructure like what you get from for lack of a better term, the Web3 stuff. Yeah, the smart contract.
Can I?
Yeah, go for it.
What is Web3?
Oh,
Yeah.
Web3 is the third version of the internet. And so the fundamental tenets of Web3 are decentralization, permissionless smart contracts, running things without human intervention. It's basically code, which powers the entire system, code that cannot be turned off or altered by any participant. It's also about self-sovereignty. So it's about you controlling your own money. So you are your own bank. So there is the whole financial aspect of Web3, there's the technological aspect, and there's the cultural aspect.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that sort of interests me about Web3 stuff is what a completely different internet could look like. So I've been doing some work with Gossip Sub, which is the gossip protocol of the Interplanetary File Service, which is a Web3 like project. I'm sure there are many like it, but it's a project to invent a distributed version of the internet, right? And it seems to me like people have only barely scratched the surface of the applications that are made more effective or made possible by blockchain. And a lot of the ideas that we read about don't feel like things that need blockchain, but there are ideas out there in the ether that do, and maybe they haven't been discovered yet. So I guess I wonder, like, do you think that we will be using the World Wide Web 10 years from now? Or do you think that we'll be on something that looks maybe a little bit like torrenting and everybody is hosting information and it works in a completely different manner where there's no such thing as ICANN, right? There's no such thing as buying a URL from a centralized service? Or do you think these cohabitate? We'll have Web 2 and Web 3 simultaneously, and they interleave in some places, and other times they're separate. What do you think is the future in that regard?
Yeah, I think we'll see the same transition, that we saw from Web 1, which was, static websites, basically replicating information from the real world, like an online version of a magazine, or on like YouTube, were like amateur versions of popular TV shows, and we'll see the transition like we did from Web 1 into Web 2, where content was created by the consumer, right? It was no longer top down, it was bottom up. Whatever you uploaded to Facebook was Facebook's content, right? Because Facebook didn't create any of its own, neither did Instagram or WhatsApp or Snapchat or any of those, apps in Web 2. The problem in Web 2 was that these were centralized services. So if Facebook decided to ban your account, you had no recourse, and you immediately lost whatever audience you had created on that platform, right? Web3 allows you to own all of your own content and control all of your own content. Furthermore, it allows you to be compensated financially for your content, which is unheard of in Web 2, right? It was Zuckerberg who is getting paid, not you, right? So to your point, I think in the next 5 years, we are going to see an accelerated transition between Web 2 to Web 3. There is a lot of speculation, right? From Web 2 companies, from IRL multinational corporations, about how they can adopt the protocols to suit their own needs, right? Or to even continue doing business the way they are now. I think, philosophical, optimistic people, I would say I'm in that category, hope that we're going to actually disrupt the existing business models of the 20th century. And actually that this is a whole new paradigm. We are going to come up with brand new ways of thinking about how to disseminate information and discuss and work collectively and create new products using these very nascent protocols. So the transitionary period over the next 5 years is you're going to have some brand new stuff like NFTs, for example, but then you're going to have some old stuff like banks will say we are now accepting deposits of Bitcoin and Ether, right? So don't use, you know, a crypto exchange, just come to the big bank and we'll take your coins, you know?
Yeah, I
Well,
think, oh, go ahead.
Well, I guess I really had no idea how much substance there was here. I guess I was ready to ask long ago, what made you want to buy this this script, and who owns the rights to it?
Right.
What makes you able to actually make your own content and sell it to Netflix? But
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question.
I mean, what we're
Yeah.
talking about now is so much more interesting, but that question of mine kind of got,
You know, the book was,
uh-oh.
Oh, should we?
you're still there.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we're there.
Sorry, we just cut out.
The book was really an excuse to find like-minded people
Mhm.
and to come together to a group of us who all had shared interests.
So
The fact is that when the fund was raised, yep,
oh, I think there's a big delay.
I think it's moderate, but
Oh.
I guess the IP question is an interesting one. So maybe you
Yeah.
can speak to that a little bit. Like how can you make derivative works without getting sued into oblivion by Jodorowsky's surviving wife or whoever it is that has the IP to this stuff?
yes. So we went viral twice. We went viral in you know, European newspapers and online media and blogs and social media at the end of November when we set this record price at auction. We went viral a second time when we tweeted on January 10th, I believe. Oh, it was January 15th, our 3-part mandate. And the reason why we went viral that second time was some people, mostly reporters who had not done research, assumed that when we said we wanted to create an animated series, it would be based on the book. And unfortunately, that was never the case. We have lots of Medium blog posts and social media posts that made it clear that we were inspired by the book. And you know, that's a whole nother story to talk about the genesis of how Jodorowsky's project got together, how he brought together the best and the brightest to create this truly original artwork, you know, an adaptation of Dune. We were inspired by that whole process of basically assembling very talented individuals, getting them all in the same room together, working together to create something new and original and unique. That is what we were inspired to do. And we thought the most effective media to do that would actually be as an animated series, simply because of the popularity of media being consumed on streaming platforms, right? I read an article in the Financial Times of London at the end of December, which said that in the year 2022, all streaming platforms combined will be spending a total of $115 billion with a B on new content, right? So all of these corporations are spending over $100 billion acquiring content. So doesn't it make sense to create some content and sell it to them? Because there's a market there, right? We can get paid. To answer your question about intellectual property regarding the book, after we acquired the book, our proxy who won the auction has, you know, legal representation, personal legal representation. And so they started the process of reaching out to all of the partners in the creation of the book. So we've mentioned some of them: Jodorowsky, who's over 90 years old, Mobius, who is deceased, but his estate is active, H.R. Geiger, who is deceased, but his estate is active, etc. And we reached out to all of the people to try and basically get their participation in our DAO, one way or the other. Unfortunately, these estates and individuals, you know, they are from a different generation, and they've also lived their life or they are no longer living. And therefore the interest in a brand new technology, a brand new project, it just wasn't there. Also, the rights were not for sale, period. Didn't matter how much money we had. They were not interested. And so by the beginning of January, it was very clear that we would not be able to collaborate with the original creators. And so we made a concerted effort to pursue different verticals. And we've done a lot of work in the last 3 months.
I mean, to be fair to you guys, like The Mandalorian is basically 80% a ripoff of Dune. So there's plenty of amazing, you know, or not amazing, but there's plenty of like derivative works, right, that are deriving content from
That's
Dune,
right.
and they get away with
Yeah.
it. And so there is a legal defense to be made here. I mean, The Mandalorian literally fights a giant worm in the desert. So
I have another.
You know, so,
sorry.
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, okay. It was regarding this sort of, like, you represent what, you know, I forgot what DAO stands for, but it sounds like it's a replacement or an alternative to the modern day corporation.
Right.
Where you
Correct.
can have an entity comprised of several individuals who all have a certain amount of power, and, you know, the corporation is essentially, it has rights itself. And so do you see more DAOs sort of, I don't know if is it plural DAO, or if DAO is just the name of your,
or
it's a
maybe
DAO.
another way to put this is like, what could DAOs be used for other than just crowdfunding to buy something?
Yeah,
right?
'cause
Yeah,
Like
there's
could-
several already. Like there's the Constitution DAO that didn't
Right.
successfully buy the U.S.
Right.
Rare Constitution.
But for example,
copy.
could we make a DAO so that instead of working as software engineers for a company, we work for a DAO
Yeah.
and we vote on who we're going to take on as clients? So just as a concrete
Yeah,
example,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like what other things can
Yes.
we be doing with DAOs besides just buying shit?
Yes. So a DAO can be formed around any interest or topic in any industry by anyone. You know, you mentioned like maybe a professional services company, right? That contracts out software engineering. There's a very successful DAO called Raid Guild DAO, which was founded in Colorado, which is a really the birthplace really of active DAOs. And so I'd encourage everybody to look that up. And that's essentially like a KPMG or PricewaterhouseCooper or McKinsey. You know, it's a management consultant firm where they contract out IT services, financial, accounting, project management, you know, and so they're running like a consultancy, like a consulting business. Our DAO is more about creative production. And so we think of ourselves as a production studio, right? So in the same way that Studio Ghibli produced, you know, the kind of marquee works by Miyazaki, one of the co-founders, but they also invite professional artists and they produce their films, right? Mm-hmm. Another precedent is Image Comics, which is the third largest comic book publisher after Marvel and DC. And Image Comics basically accepts proposals from comic book writers and comic book artists to publish their limited series. And so Image Comics basically curates and selects projects that they believe in, and then they help them market and publish and sell their books. So SpiceDAO, the future vision is essentially to become a production studio where we review proposals from the community. We also invite established creators, like we're currently negotiating a deal with Frank Miller, who created 300 and Sin City and The Dark Knight. And you know, that was basically by inviting him and having a relationship with him. So yeah, a DAO can be focused on many different things. And those are just two examples.
By the way, Ryan, Daniel, and Mary, if you want to ask questions, just unmute yourself and go for it. Otherwise, the three of us will keep asking.
Yeah.
But you should feel free to jump in if there's anything you want to ask.
And I, for one, am very excited for this content that you are
absolutely.
making.
Yeah.
It sounds,
You have a receptive audience here.
yeah.
So it sounds like REI could be a DAO, just as an example, right? Like they could, I mean, REI is a co-op, so they're already like morally speaking part of the way there. So if they wanted to mechanize the co-op aspect by being a DAO, they could do that and it would function, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what are the essential elements of a DAO? You have your token, which has no monetary value, can be created and distributed for free. And that is your governance token about how people can vote. You have your preferred social media platform to basically let people talk. And right now, Discord is the most popular platform for that. So you create a server which has different channels, which are different topics, and it allows people to communicate. You have your discourse, which is where proposals, first drafts of proposals or just ideas are shared. And then the community can give you feedback. And then you take all those comments and answer all those questions and you refine it into your final proposal on Snapshot, which is where people vote. Essentially, if a vote passes, it is up to the leadership of the DAO, and there are different forms of leadership, to implement the proposal that was passed. That's all it takes to be a DAO.
Well, I guess, and my thinking of this connection with the DAO with, smart contracts, and you have these tokens that are, I'm only like lightly versed in smart contracts and like really, Ethereum, how it can be used to drive these smart contracts and actually run code in the blockchain and stuff. But it seems like the direction I was going was, a modern corporation may be susceptible to corruption and things like that. But maybe with a DAO, with the use of with a token, and smart contracts, maybe does that mean that there wouldn't be corruption, or it would be impossible for there to be corruption, or if there was something nefarious going on, that it would be completely obvious and out in the open?
It would be. So everything is public and transparent. I think the caveat is that the alphanumeric addresses, which represent each wallet, right, which holds the tokens, those can be anonymous. So there's different kind of levels of public presentation of an individual. Their actions are completely public. The contents of the wallet is completely public. What is not public is the identity of the individual or a group of individuals who control a wallet. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So there is a lot of nefarious activity happening in plain sight, but the wallets are anonymous, and there are protocols in place to basically break up the blockchain, right, which is a record of the complete history of transactions from step one to step whatever. But there are protocols which allow you to break that chain and basically move your tokens to a brand new wallet which has no history. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff, and this is all very exciting. I think that people view these decentralized apps, they're called D apps, as as nefarious or shady. But the fact is, everything that's being built right now is in its infancy, and so you can't judge, peer-to-peer file sharing based on the activity of Napster, right? Because that was just the first version of it. And so,
Right.
yes, they were infringing on copyright and they were quote unquote stealing music.
Built on porn, like we.
There you go. Exactly. So, any criticism that the industry receives right now is really irrelevant because things are just being created. They're being used totally randomly, and there is no consequence yet. One thing to keep in mind with the financial aspect of tokens is you never put in any more money than you're willing to lose. And where does that slogan come from? It comes from gambling, right? Which is a perfectly legal and global enterprise. And yeah, trading tokens is no different than gambling, whether it's you're gambling on sports games or you're in a casino. That's where it's at right now. But the fact is that tokens were originally created to represent a fraction of a group, right? And the fact that they eventually became traded for cash money was just a byproduct, but it was never the original intention or goal.
Yeah. I have a question on sort of on that topic. What about in situations where you do want, one person, one vote scenarios, not just if you own a certain percentage? How can you prevent sybil attacks?
Sorry, I heard your whole question except the last part. How do you
prevent sybil attacks? Well, it's when someone creates a whole bunch of
sybil attacks. Yep. Yes. So, if you wanted one person, one vote, you would simply, one wallet would own 100% of the tokens, right? So now they have 100% voting power. In terms of sybil attacks, there are many protocols that have been developed to counter this. A lot of work has been done by the Ethereum name service, ENS, on preventing sybil attacks in their DAO. So I think they're a great resource to learn more about that. And a sybil attack is basically where you have one individual, acting as if they are multiple individuals, right?
Right. Which
So,
is a feature of your DAO, but it's a bug in somebody else's DAO, right? Like it depends on what you're setting out to do. Because
that's right.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Jan. I had a quick question as well, and it kind of goes along when it comes to like risks in DAOs and the government involvement. And I recently heard that government is trying to get involved to provide like some kind of legal framework for these things. And I was wondering, like, is there something you hope for, or you would hope for no involvement, or is there something that could actually provide help for DAOs, or is this a risk for future DAOs, or just in general, like how do you stand to government involvement when it comes to these things?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think how involved IRL, how involved in the real world do you want to be, or how relevant are your activities in the real world? That's where you would visit how to structure your DAO. So a precedent was set last year in the state of Wyoming, where you can incorporate a DAO as a company. My understanding is in Wyoming is where the LLC legal structure was created, and now they have created one for DAO. The issue in that case is that any member of a DAO that is registered in the state of Wyoming is essentially a part owner, and consequently, they are exposed to, obviously an LLC is a limited liability corporation, but nonetheless, they would be exposed to any liabilities or any challenges that were made on behalf of the DAO. So that is I think, an imperfect solution to legally incorporating a DAO and basically having it operate, under the laws of man. if your project is a technology product that is, exclusively doing business in Web3, I personally don't see the need to incorporate it or identify it under any law, right? Any state law. What SpiceDAO has done, as I mentioned, it's a very unique enterprise where one foot is in the real world and one foot is in Web3, is that it had to pay for the book that we won at auction with US dollars. Of course, we raised our funds in a cryptocurrency, Ether. So what is the process to convert your coins into cash to pay an IRL business, right? Then the next thing we had to do was establish ownership. We had to then custody the book in terms of art storage, right? So we had to think about security and where to keep it. And, we want it to be in a temperature controlled place, with like professionals handling it, etc. And all of those services had to be paid for in cash, right? In dollars.
Are you a member of the core team?
I am a member of the DAO. And as a matter of fact, the way I work directly with the core team, because it's actually myself who represents the DAO in the real world.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, all legal contracts, etc. We came up with a very unique structure, which I'm not sure if we're ready to talk about that publicly yet. But I'm really, really excited to share it when the time is right. But we came up with a very novel legal structure where we essentially have real world legal entities which represent the DAO, but are not the DAO.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a very important distinction because what it means is the legal entities in the real world basically execute the wishes of the DAO, which is not an entity, it doesn't exist because it only lives in Web3. And the DAO is controlled by the community, right? So basically any decisions that the DAO makes, we have legal entities in the real world which simply implement those decisions as required, right? Because there can be decisions made by the DAO that are just relevant in Web3, in which case the IRL legal entity is not involved at all. But when we have to, for example, rent storage space in the art storage warehouse situation to keep the book, that's when the legal entity is able to sign contracts acting on behalf of the DAO. But it is not the DAO. And that is very, very interesting way to do business, I think.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, so like if the legal entity like went rogue, for example, how would the DAO
It can't.
realistically sue them, right? And it's
It can't go rogue.
the code. Sure,
It
can.
can't go rogue.
At some point, right, the legal entity has a bit of cash, right? Because like at some point you need to
It
pay
doesn't.
for the art storage or whatever, right?
It doesn't. No. It only receives the funds required to take care of whatever bill needs to be paid at that time. So it has no reserves of cash. That is all kept in the Web3 ecosystem. So currently the DAO's treasury, which is public, is 100% denominated in Ether, which is kind of a risky strategy, right? Because the price of Ether is volatile, which means our treasury goes up and down depending on the price of Ether. But the legal entities have no cash reserves.
Sure, but like at some point there's a few minutes, right, where the DAO send, or, you know, some like somehow the smart contract, you know, you sell a certain amount, and let's say the legal entity takes that, and instead of paying the warehouse, they
Right.
I don't know, buy a car, right?
Right. That is
Like
possible.
that can
Absolutely.
physically happen. What happens in that case?
Yes, it can. Yeah. I'm sorry?
What happens in that case?
Oh, what happens in that case? Well, I think that, you know, everybody in this ecosystem and in this community shares good faith and shares a similar vision. So right now, we're very lucky that is a very small community, right? I mean, relatively speaking, to any other enterprise or group on Earth, Web3 is extra tiny. I haven't looked at the latest numbers, you know, but one figure I remember from the summer of last year was there were only 30,000 wallets buying and selling NFTs between each other. Okay, so this is an example of how it is a very small community built by like-minded people who do not wish each other harm or ill will. And there is really not a lot of negative things happening, despite, you know, whatever story you might read in the mainstream media.
All right.
I say all this because trust is a big part of Web3, even though it is all about trustlessness, right? Smart contracts acting without any intervention. And this theoretically, like philosophically, it's supposed to remove the need for trust between humans. This is true and untrue, but I would say that, you know, we have like-minded people building towards the same goal. And therefore, if you can establish relationships, right? Because Web3 really is all about relationships. That's how anything gets built and scaled successfully, is through relationships. That's how things progress. And so in our case, you know, I am the individual who represents the DAO's certain activities in the real world. And there's trust between myself and the core team that they will send me the money, right? When someone bills me, right? So it's both ways. I am going out on a limb, right? And using my name and my resources. And I'm trusting them to pay me. And in kind, they are trusting me to use the money for what it's meant to be for. So there's risk on both sides.
But so if you need trust anyways, what's the point of, you know, going through all this and, you know, like dealing with the extra carbon footprint, etc., that that blockchain will require?
Well, as we discussed previously, this is the very beginning, right, of the technology. So we haven't had decades or hundreds of years like every other industry to iterate and perfect and maximize. We literally created this stuff yesterday, and now we're just using it in different ways. So, you know, that's why precedents being set by SpiceDAO, which is a very forward-thinking, progressive, proactive, you know, organization with a big picture thinking, meaning we don't just have to be native in the digital world. We can have an impact in the physical world, right? With examples like these, and then finding the workarounds about how to secure IRL services, you know, based on decisions made digitally, are those baby steps to figuring out how organizations can work in the future.
So one of the things that I find potentially concerning about, both concerning and awesome, it's like a bug and a feature about anything blockchain related, is the permanence of the data, right? So you write to a ledger, and it takes about, in my experience, 15 minutes of kind of looking at the Bitcoin paper to understand why it works. Like, it's really a very simple idea and very convincing. And once you've written to the ledger and other people have agreed that it's written, there's this phenomenal financial incentive for all the other peers to keep your data on the ledger. And as a result, you get this distributed ledger where things are kind of permanently recorded, which is fantastic, but also potentially very bad, because you could do things like write child porn to a distributed ledger, or write revenge porn, or, I'm sure there are other examples I can't think of content that people find objectionable for, moral grounds that I think most people agree we don't want to like host and make available. And so this doesn't directly relate to what you're doing, because you're not hosting data on a distributed ledger. But as somebody participating in Web3, I'm curious, what do you think about this kind of trade-off of like, well, you can build all these cool technologies on having a permanent ledger, but on the other hand, you have this obvious downside that if there's content that you believe is immoral to host, well, you're kind of forced to host it in order to participate in the ledger, just because of the basic financial system, if that makes sense.
Well, I come from a non-technical background, so I don't think I'm prepared to answer this question in any meaningful way. I have no technological insight into how that can be mitigated. I know that this argument has been made public in the past. It's not relevant to me. It's not something I've ever, it's not something I've ever considered. I would point back to what we were just discussing, which is community, and a group of like-minded individuals creating products that we think will improve society in the future, not harm it. And so, I think that's where my head is at, and that's all I see. The worst things that I've seen in Web3 is that people don't do the research, and they send their tokens to someone who takes them and doesn't give them something back, for example.
I just wanted to make one final point regarding this idea of tokens that are essentially worthless monetarily, but give you power within the organization, right? But I guess by having power within the organization, they have now become valuable. So
like NFTs, right? Like the whole idea is as non-fungible, and yet in some kind of philosophical sense, it's fungible because you can sell the art.
And so I guess, correct me if this is wrong, but I was thinking, because of the worthless nature of these tokens, maybe that there would be no incentive to do anything nefarious. I don't know.
I think it depends on
and this happened for years after Bitcoin was created, right? In 2009. The tokens were being distributed and traded, with no monetary value, simply because people believed in this concept, right? That there could be this permissionless system that could represent money that was not controlled by anyone, right? I think, fast forward to today, when there is a pool of funds that have been raised, right? Which in our case is our DAO treasury. The tokens, which are valueless, absolutely, they do, as you say, hold power over decisions relating to that pool of capital, which is separate, right? And independent. And so that's where the value comes from, is if you own a lot of tokens, it means you have a larger say over that independent pool of capital and how it's used.
Wow.
So Lucas, we really appreciate your time. This has been fantastic. Two quick closing things. The first is it okay with you if we post a recording of this online? It's fine if you're not okay with it, but if you are, it'd be great. I'm sure people will watch it. And the second is, if people want to reach out to you, they want to get involved with SpiceDAO, if they're just interested in Web3, what do you recommend? Should they email the SpiceDAO? Should they follow you on Twitter? Like, what's the mechanism by which individuals who think this is all very exciting and they would like to participate, by which they can do so?
No, we are a public, facing enterprise, and membership is open to all. So we're more than happy if you post this online. The DAO's main forms of communication are our Twitter, number one, which is at the SpiceDAO on Twitter. There in our bio, you'll see a link to our Discord, which is where the community organizes and discusses with each other. On the Discord are more links in our official links section about how to find our discourse channel, which is where the first draft of the proposals are published, and links to our snapshot, which is where all of our official voting happens. So yeah, we're super accessible and invite everybody to come check us out.
Well, that sounds great. Thank you so much
Very
for your
cool.
time. We
Yeah,
really
thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you guys reaching out. And look, we are very interested on the technical side about building new, contracts. And specifically, what interested me about your organization was the mathematical side of things. Now, as I mentioned, that's not my background, but we'd love to talk to you guys in the future about, specifically, like practically speaking, how NFT mints are based on mathematical formulas. And I think there's a lot of potential there to kind of grow out how a mint process could happen using math.
That'd be great. I think my friend Jacob and I run this group together, and most likely we're going to organize an event sometime maybe this summer with maybe some folks from Protocol Labs or a couple other companies where they're really working in the space. And we would obviously invite you and some NFT artists we know to discuss kind of maybe what is the future of smart contracts and what are some interesting things that can be done with smart contracts at a more technical level. So if you'd like to participate in that, I'll certainly shoot you a message when we start organizing that, and maybe you could join. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
Oh, fantastic. Love it. Love it. That's a great idea.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much.
Good talking to you guys. Yeah. Take
Bye.
care.